And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live and Little Italy Podcast.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our podcast today. Deborah Kobylt Live, Little Italy Podcast. And joining me is Dannie De Novo. Dannie is an author. She wrote 2 books, Get in a Good Mood and Stay There. And it's all gravy, recipes for happiness. Dannie is also a happiness coach. We're going to talk about that. You're going to find out why she became a happiness coach, because honestly, Dannie, your story is extraordinary. And you are also a lawyer. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it so much. Loved reading your books.
Oh, thank you. It's so good to be with you.
Yeah. Let's talk about you. You grew up in rural Pennsylvania, Italian American family. I love that. I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay.
And talk to me about growing up, about what you related to. And then I believe at about the age 12, things started to change for you. Talk to us.
Well, I think I had a magical childhood up until that point. My father had a boarding stable. My brother and I grew up around animals. I was always riding ponies or horses. We had all these characters around us, goats and pigs. It was great. I really connected very deeply with the animals. I feel like they taught me a lot growing up. It was just a fun place to be. I could always be myself there. I never felt like I was out of place, which I loved. And yeah, I took a lot of pride in being Italian, right? I love the food. I love the culture. And then things started to shift for me. I think, after the age of 8, I kind of started to feel it, but it really kind of cut in around the age of 12. And I just started not feeling like myself. I was tired all the time. I wasn't interested in things like I used to be. I didn't even want to ride my horse sometimes, and that was not like me. So I went to my parents and I said, hey, I think I'm sick. I need to go to the doctor. Something's wrong. And they said, no, it's just hormones. It's teenage stuff. You'll grow out of it. Don't worry. And of course, being in the Italian family, right? We're always screaming. We're always talking, but we're never really saying anything. And nobody really wanted to deal with the whole, she might be depressed kind of a thing. So of course I go to the doctor and they run all of the tests and all the blood work comes back great. And so now I'm going to specialists and everything else. And meanwhile, I'm just getting worse. And finally, one specialist said, I'd really like you to sit down and talk with a woman in my office. And I said, okay, I'll do whatever I need to do. I just want to get better. And I sat down with this therapist and I kind of told her what was going on. And I stopped and she looked at me and she said, honey, I think you're depressed. And I said, I don't think I'm depressed. I don't really know what that means, first of all, but you don't understand. I have a nice house. I go to a good school. I get good grades. I have a horse. I can't be depressed. And she said, honey, I think you're depressed. And I said, okay, what do we do about it? And she picked up the phone and called the physician. And the next thing you know, I was started down that road of trying medication after medication. That was around the age of 16.
What did your parents have to say about that, about going on the medication? Were they just like, okay, try it? What were they saying?
Yeah, that's about the point my parents checked out. They really just didn't know what to do about it. And I think they definitely had their own stuff going on. And so it was a difficult topic for everybody. And they just kind of let the doctor and the therapist handle things. We really didn't talk about it. Every once in a while, my father would kind of chime in with the whole, you don't really have anything to be depressed about. Look at your life again. And that put a lot of guilt on me because, in some respects, I knew he was right. I had a really great life. I shouldn't have been feeling that way. And yet every day was becoming more and more of a struggle.
One of your books, I believe, is dedicated to your grandparents. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your Italian grandparents. What did they have to say about this? Because you hit on something. You said in an Italian upbringing, sometimes there's a lot of talking, but we really wonder what everyone's talking about. It's a loud environment. I've been in those environments. I try to make sense of those environments, and then sometimes I become that environment, right? Because it's like, well, okay, I'll jump in, but it's a lot of noise. Like, what was it like for you? I'm sure very loving, but how did they help in all this? And by that, I mean, I believe they really tried to help you, right?
I think they wanted to, but really no one intervened. And that's kind of what led me down the path that I eventually went down, because I was kind of on my own. There wasn't really a whole lot of advocating on my behalf. There wasn't a whole lot of guidance. And I just think, with my parents, I just think they were frozen. They just did not know how to handle it. I mean, I can imagine looking back how difficult it was for me to come to them and say, I don't want to live anymore. I mean, that's a hard thing to hear from your child. So I think they honestly just didn't know what to do.
Okay, Dannie, when you say that to a parent, that's a 5 alarm fire.
Yes.
What do you think, looking back at everything, to help someone, not that you're a doctor, right? We're not saying any of that, but for someone who's feeling that incredibly low, what do you think was happening? Did you just feel like you don't belong in the world? And by that, I mean, you didn't relate to other people your age. That's common. Tell us, what do you think was really happening to bring you so low? And then how were you acting that out?
Right. I think it was a perfect storm of things. I mean, looking back, I can see my path unfold, and I know that it was all for a reason. Of course, at the time, it was really difficult to go through what I went through. And it was a number of things. I think that I was always that person who was asking questions. I was always that kid that wanted to question everything that was going on at school, with life. I was always saying stuff like, why does it have to be that way? I don't understand why it has to be this way. And everyone kept saying, well, that's why you're depressed, because you're making it hard for yourself. Just go with the flow. Do it like everybody else. Why do you have to question it? And honestly, the only place that I really did feel like myself was at my stable with my horses. They are incredibly empathetic animals, and I felt like they understood me, if that makes sense. Whereas I didn't really see that from other people. And so many people had started to distance themselves from me that I was very isolated. On top of that, my parents were not very happy people. My grandparents and my extended family were not very happy people. They put on a really good show a lot of the time, but deep down, I knew they were struggling. And I think the hardest part for me as a kid was I knew they were struggling and they kept denying it. And so I just had this crazy, kind of pull and tug of, you're telling me things are okay. I can feel they're not. Why can't we talk about it? I was just kind of always in my head about that. And I started to believe that I wasn't lovable and that I wasn't worthy. And I really didn't have a very good spiritual connection either. So all of this stuff kind of came together perfectly to just sort of explode.
Now, you were on pills, but it wasn't just pills. You also took a deeper dive into trying to sort of help you feel, oh, here's the word, normal, right? Yeah. What happened? Because let's talk about that.
Oh, it was so bad. The medication and I did not agree. I had so many side effects. And so it was try this one and then try this one and then up the dosage here and add this. And I was numbed out. I didn't know what planet I was on. My pupils were always dilated from the medication. So I was walking around with sunglasses and didn't want to go outside. Just felt sick all the time. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So eventually I became very suicidal. And I checked myself into a mental institution for help because I didn't trust myself anymore. I knew that I was taking too many chances and that I was going to succeed if I didn't get some real help. And I went in, and I had to, if you voluntarily checked yourself in, you had to stay there for 2 weeks. And so it was group therapy and it was one-on-one therapy. And all they did, of course, was up my medication again. So now I'm in this facility in full lockdown unit, completely isolated, and in group therapy with women who have, been in abusive relationships, and someone had lost a child. And here I am at 19 years old with pretty much no life experience, feeling guilty for being depressed because these women had real trauma in their lives, and I really hadn't experienced any of that. So they let me go after the 2 weeks. Completely numbed out on medication again. And I kind of held it together for a few months because the holidays were coming up. And then on the other side of January 1st, I just completely crashed again. And I went back in and I said, look, this is it. If you don't help me, I know I'm not going to be back here. I'm not going to be anywhere because I'm going to succeed. I can't take it anymore. I'm exhausted. I can't deal with the misery of it. And they gave me one last option. And they said, the only thing we have left for you is electroshock therapy. And I didn't really know what it was or know any better. And I said, okay, if that's all that's left, let's do it because I need an answer. And I signed on the line because I was over 18. And the next day they came with a wheelchair and they took me into the secret part of the mental institution that no one gets to see, which was pretty horrific, honestly.
And what happened? For those of us who have never been in that room,
Yeah,
it sort of, look, it sort of terrifies me. It's the stuff that movies are made of, right?
it
What
is.
happens when you go into that room? Like, what do they do? Do they strap you down? You gotta tell us.
Yes.
Please.
So I went down, and so this is obviously a long time ago, way before COVID. So everyone's already suited up and have their masks on, like they're going into surgery, which really confused me because everyone was saying this wasn't like that big of a deal. And they were like, no, you have to go under anesthesia because we're literally going to put like electricity through your brain. And I was like, oh, okay. And so a nurse handed me a medicine cup. There were 2 pills in it. And she said, take these, but you can't have any water because you're going under anesthesia. And I said, oh, please, no more medication. I can't take it anymore. I can't take one more pill. And she said, no, honey, it's Tylenol. She's like, trust me, you'll be glad you took it later. And I said, okay. And I swallowed those pills and they strapped me down on a gurney, started the IV, and then they wheel me through these huge double doors into this room that looks like something out of Frankenstein's laboratory. So you want to talk about the movies, it looked exactly like that. Archaic, old equipment, dials and worry things all over the place. And I started crying and I panicked and I said, you know what, I changed my mind. Let's not do this. And I could feel the medication starting to take place. It's kind of like getting like drowsy and a little loopy. And they took my head and pushed it back and strapped it down under the gurney. And when I went back, I saw this huge man coming towards me with these 2 giant probes in his hand. And then I was out. And when I woke up, at first I kind of thought that I had died. I thought maybe I had succeeded in what I had done because I was in this dark room. It was very cold and I just felt really weird. And then I kind of figured out what was going on. And I felt like I'd been hit in the head with a sledgehammer. So I was so grateful for that Tylenol because the first sign that I had really undergone anything was just that constant headache that lasted for about 6 months.
Okay. What did you feel like, though? Did you feel like yourself, just calmer? Like, what did it do to you? Boy, that is terrifying.
I was so terrified. I didn't even know what to do. And I really felt like I had no one to go to, right? I mean, I had kind of asked for this, right? I made my bed and now I was lying in it. And I didn't know what to do except to trust the process. And the process involved me going through these treatments every other day for weeks upon weeks, which was just incredibly grueling. I mean, my body physically was breaking down. But on top of that, I was at dinner one night and my little brother was there and he was telling me a story about us riding our ponies together when we were little. And it was, very detailed and he's very excited and he's, got all these, we did this and we weren't supposed to go there. And then we jumped over that stream and we made it. And then we went here. Like he's so excited, right? All this detail. And he's looking at me, waiting for me to sort of join in, and I have no recollection of what he's talking about. And so now I see his face in terror because he's just like, how, there's no way you can't remember this. It was like one of the greatest days of our lives. You have to remember. And so I saw the panic in his face and I just kind of played along and I said, oh yeah. And I repeated some details and he felt better. So I pushed myself away from the dinner table. I run into my bedroom and I pulled my photo album out from underneath my bed. And I started going through the pictures and I realized that I had lost my childhood memories. They were just completely gone. And I knew obviously it was from these consistent treatments over time. So that is what really scared me into finally going to them and saying, you know what, it worked. I'm better, even though I wasn't. I was so depressed and beside myself. I couldn't take it. But just the thought of having to go back through that one more time was enough for me to just say, yeah, I'm done. Let's wrap this up. And so they said, well, then you've got to show us. And so I had to go through a list of things to prove that I was better. And that's kind of where I started faking being okay, just kind of like everybody else in my family.
Wow. How many times did you have electroshock therapy? I mean, how many times did you go under that?
It was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for about 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Well, do you think in the long run that it may have helped you, or do you think it's because you sort of like just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to fake my way through it. You know, that fake it till you make it. It's a terrible thing to say because you really shouldn't use that with depression. But again, I'm not a doctor, so please, anyone, don't listen to my advice. But what was it? Was it a little bit of the therapy? Was it a little bit of you just saying, okay, man, I got to figure it out. I'm going to fake it and pretend I'm okay? Like, oh my gosh, tell us.
I don't think it was the therapy. I think that put a lot of fear of God into my heart, honestly. I need to see something like that and to have undergone
Wow.
it. Because I had lived a pretty sheltered life up until that point, and so it was a
Yeah.
lot for me to take on. I think I just kind of made the decision that I wasn't going to be the young girl in the psych ward anymore. I didn't want to live out that persona. I really just wanted to forget everything, and I had a lot of shame
Wow.
around everything. So I was trying to explain away gaps in my resume with college and everything else, and trying to explain to people why I was, a year older than everyone else or 2 years older because I dropped out of school in order to kind of take care of things and then finally got back on track. So it was, I think it was just the whole, I can't go back there. And I didn't want to kill myself and have my parents and my brother have to live with that for the rest of their lives. So I just kind of assumed that this was what my life was going to be like, and I needed to find a way to live as a miserable person, basically.
Yeah, but how interesting because you didn't. As it turns out, you did not live the rest of your life as a miserable person. So let's very briefly talk about, fast forward a little bit. Somehow you ended up in law school, right?
Yes,
You became a lawyer.
I
Let's
did.
briefly talk about that. And then life got a little better because you made the decision to say, I'm not going to live that way. This is just going to be my life until I figure it out. I'm just going to keep going, right? Talk
Yeah,
to us. You ended up in law school. Then I want to talk about these books. Like, how did things change?
I went to law school. I had been a paramedic and a volunteer firefighter and was very much into public safety and wanted to find a way to sort of help that environment. I thought legislation was the way to do it, so I went to law school
Mm,
and baked my way through that. I mean, unfortunately, law is
wow.
kind of a profession where there are a lot of really depressed people, so I kind of fit in that regard. It's also a profession where there's a lot of alcoholism and other drug addiction, and drugs and alcohol and depression do not go well together. So I was not in a great place, but I was functioning. I was going to work. I was paying the bills. I was doing the things that you're supposed to do on a day-to-day basis. And then I had my daughter. And
Mm,
that was the first time that I ever really remember feeling any kind of joy. I loved being her mom, but I was still miserable. And then she changed everything for me. She woke me up one day. I'm making dinner and I'm stirring a pot on the stove. And she's on the floor. She's about a year old. And she's got her play bowls and spoons that she's banging around. And she stopped and kind of got my attention like, hey, mom, watch this. And she picked up her bowl and her spoon and she started deliberately stirring in her bowl the way that I was stirring the pot on the stove. And she wanted recognition for this because she was mimicking me. And
oh,
it was the first time I'd ever seen her do that. So, I bent over real proud. Oh yeah, just like mommy. And then I
oh,
passed out. I mean, I almost fell on top of my daughter and I kind of came to next to her because I suddenly realized that she was copying my every move. And it didn't matter what I said, it mattered what I did. And I was
good.
teaching her how to live this very lonely, depressed, and unfulfilled life. And so I sat down next to her on the floor and I cried my eyes out and I promised her that I was going to learn everything there was to know about being happy for her sake. because I did not think that I could do it. I didn't think I was wired for it. I thought my fate was sealed, but she was young, and I figured if I could figure it out, I could teach her, and then she could avoid all the crap that I had gone through and live a happy life. And so I started studying happiness like I had studied for the bar exam, going everywhere, downloading information, contacting, shaman and monks and personal development people and business development people, everybody I could get a hold of. And I just started kind of taking notes and figuring out what they were doing. And, I would try it out and see what I thought. And I would keep statistics and I would keep notes on everything, like a lawyer, to see, what is the real answer here? I wanted the answer to the question about happiness. And then I started working with some people who took me under their wing, and I started implementing what they were doing. And all of a sudden, my life started to change. And I was like, maybe I can do this. Maybe I could be wired for happiness. But everyone thought I'd gone off the deep end, right? Because basically I had kind of a personality shift. I went from this very quiet and submissive sort of type A personality person who just kind of, did what I was supposed to do like everyone else, because I didn't want to be miserable, even though I was, to all of a sudden trying all this stuff and wanting to go here and meet this person. And, I was in a good mood all of a sudden. It put a lot of people off, and a lot of people started exiting my life. And it was it was a very isolating time for me.
Wait a minute. It's like, hey, we like Dannie better when she's miserable and depressed and wanting to kill herself. Much more fun to be around that. Honestly, what's wrong with people?
Right.
I swear to God.
I know. And, I eventually ended up getting divorced. But then one day, my younger brother, the one who was telling me the story about the ponies, came to me and he said, hey, what are you doing? You keep talking about this stuff. And I said, oh, you're interested? And he said, yeah, I'm curious. And I said, why? And he said, well, because you seem really happy, and I have never seen you this way before. And then he said, well, if it worked for you, do you think it could work for me? And I said, yeah, let's try it. And so he started doing stuff that I was doing, and his life started to change. And then I was like, oh my goodness, you know what? Maybe I can recreate this in a way for people so that they don't have to go through the pain and suffering that I went through, or at least bring themselves out of their own suffering, because you don't have to stay there. And that was a lesson that I had to learn the hard way.
Now, you've been on many network TV shows talking about this. Very briefly, tell us, what is it? I come to you, I want to go to the happiness coach. I want to find out, gosh, how do I bring happiness in my life? Is it a course? Is it one-on-one? Tell us.
I have self-led courses, so you can do an asynchronous course through my website, but I also do one-on-one coaching as well for people who kind of want to get to the heart of the matter a little bit faster, or feel like they have some, bigger things to tackle and want to do it probably in a little bit more compressed of a timeline. So it kind of really depends on where you see yourself and where you really want to be at the end of the day. Right? Your happiness should be your top priority. And so if you're not making time for it every single day, then you're kind of missing out on why we're here.
That's so important. I love that you said that. Your happiness is something that we all need to make time for every single day. Very important. The same way that we need to eat right and do some exercising, because once we start going down that slope, it's incredible. It's like a slide. You just keep going. And we need to make that time. It's funny, in our culture and in the US, I think everything's usually about money and school and getting the grades and all that stuff. And somewhere along the line, we lose track of the person inside. And this is very, very important that you've decided to stop and put a focus on that. Let's briefly go through your book. I love this. What's it called? It's Get in a Good Mood and Stay There. You talk about don't ride on your brakes. Well, first of all, you talk about starting your engine, getting started. There's many different bits that you can get out of this, the rite of passage. Is there anything you'd like to pass on about this book, a nugget that you think people can take away in this interview? Of course, buy the book, please. But would you share that with people?
I think the hardest lesson I learned that has become something I try to implement in my life every single day is this. If you want to be happy, you have to be brave. And that's a difficult thing to do, to muster up the energy to do that every single day. And for me, being brave means two things. Number one, it means listening to your heart and being honest with yourself about what truly makes you happy. And then the second part of that is acting in conformity with what your heart wants. And that means regardless of what society thinks, what the people in your life think, what your kids think, you know, what your dog thinks, it doesn't even matter. You've got to go with your heart every single time. And those are difficult things to do. Yeah. When you're standing up against, you know, even old stories and beliefs about yourself that you have to change over time in order to really push yourself outside of, you know, kind of this familiarity. You've got to get outside of this is okay, to really get over the hump into this is amazing.
Yeah, so many people sort of go against the current. And those people who go against the current, I think, are really very special, because those are the ones who've had it tough in life, whether it's Van Gogh or, you know, I saw a piece on Einstein. So many people who are going against what the norm very often are told that they can't, they won't, there's something wrong with them. And in fact, they're the ones who are really going on in life to do such great things, like I believe you have, because you're really here to help the next person who's saying, gosh, I don't fit in. That's one of the worst feelings, to feel like you're not fitting in. And at the end of the day, what you're saying is, it's okay, fit in here. Isn't that what you're saying?
You have to accept yourself and love yourself for who you are. And that's a hard thing to do as well. That is not something that we are taught how to do.
No.
And when you've gone a lifetime of telling yourself that you're not worthy, or you're not good enough, or you're not pretty enough, or you're not smart enough, changing those stories takes time, because it took time for you to build them up in the first place. People kind of want this magical, you know, make me happy all of a sudden. And it's not that simple. It takes work. Like I said, you've got to put time in every single day, just like going to the gym. If you want the muscles, you go every single day. And then after you get the muscles, you've got to be consistent in maintaining them. And your happiness is no different.
I also love this one. It's all gravy. We've got your daughter on the cover of this one here. It's all gravy, recipes for happiness. Thank you for writing these books, because that also took a lot of time too. You've really decided to make this your life's mission, and only because of everything you went through. You had to go through all that, Dannie, to get here to help the rest of us. Isn't that something?
It is. I had a conversation today with a woman who was telling me that she was suicidal and that she had tried everything and it had been like this her entire life. And her therapist didn't really understand. And, you know, it's difficult trying, I think, being a therapist, trying to treat someone with depression when you've never experienced it yourself, because I think other doctors understand pain and kind of, you know, the mechanism of how the body works, but depression's so different. And if you haven't had firsthand experience with it, how do you really, you know, treat it? How do you really understand what's going on in there? And so I really do believe that everything I went through was for that reason, so that I can help those people that are stuck just like I was. I didn't know what to do and I didn't see any hope, but there is hope and there is help if you keep going.
Dannie De Novo, thank you so much for joining us. And people can reach you from your website, right? Could you give a shout out to that again?
Yes, it's DannieDeNovo.com, and you can find my books on Amazon.com.
Yeah, and also, you know, when you go on your website, you talk about where the books are. You talk about, you know, quite a bit on there, and also how to get in touch with you. Are you giving any talks anywhere that people can attend, whether it's on Zoom or in person?
Starting in the new year, I'm going to be doing some webinars and some group coaching as well. I'm starting a new program called Mirror Child, which is about helping your child with anxiety, which is something I suffered from a lot as a child as well. And just kind of the idea that I believe that if you show me an anxious kid, I will show you an anxious parent. And so it's about controlling ourselves so that we can be the role model for our children.
Yeah. What do you do if you were an anxious parent and you know, that was me, right? Especially when they were little. And I'm like, guys, I'm sorry. I don't know what to do sometimes. And they're like, Mom, it's okay. But what do you do if you were an anxious parent? And how do you ask them to say, how do you say you're sorry to somebody?
Well, you can say you're sorry, but I think the hardest part for you is probably going to be forgiving yourself. And forgiveness is a really difficult thing for people to kind of get their arms around. And so I like to look at forgiveness as really it means abandoning it. You're just letting it go. You put it down. You don't need to carry it anymore. And you're allowed to do that. You have permission from me to forgive yourself and to let yourself heal from it, because we all make mistakes. We're all here learning every single day.
Especially if we realize that, right? And we try and do our best to, to move forward and to learn. So, very wise words. So thank you again, Dannie. Please look up her website. Please check out the webinars. And thanks for being so brave. And thanks for being so honest for all of us, because there's a lot of people who are watching this saying, gosh, me too. I've gone through that. And she got through it. So thank you for them. And everybody, you can find our show, Deborah Kobylt Live, on all platforms, Little Italy podcast as well. You could find it on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. And then, of course, we put it into an audio version on Amazon, on iHeartRadio, on Apple, just about anywhere else you get your podcast. Just look us up. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time, and take care of your health. Bye-bye.